wealthy elderly woman, abandoned by her greedy children, decided to pretend she was bankrupt to test their reactions. Furious and demanding explanations, they came back, only for her to reveal something that left them stunned. They had to face a painful truth. The silence of the house amplified the absence of the happy days. Mrs. Margaret sat in her velvet armchair, gazing at the family portrait hanging on the wall. The portrait, a relic from a better time, now painfully reminded her of the loneliness that engulfed her. Behind walls adorned with memories lay a woman struggling with the emptiness of her life. The death of her beloved husband marked the beginning of a bitter change. Once, life was simple, filled with love and unity. They had faced hardships together, dreamed together, and eventually prospered. Her husband's business flourished, and with it came wealth. But what should have been a blessing became a silent curse. Carlos, her eldest son, married young and dove into the world of business and investments. His obsession with increasing the fortune became an endless race, leaving little room for family. Richard, the youngest, single and carefree, indulged in a life of excess, endless parties and fleeting company. Their transformation from loving sons into distant figures broke Mrs. Margaret's heart. After her husband's death, she made efforts to maintain family ties, organizing lunches, sending gifts, and making surprise visits. But they always had excuses to avoid her. The void from their absence grew, as did her grief. Mrs. Margaret couldn't understand how money, which should have been a blessing, had driven her children away. She felt trapped in a golden palace, where wealth couldn't buy the one thing she longed for, the love of her family. One day, her doctor informed her that she needed a simple surgery and required a companion before and after the procedure. Hopeful that her children might show concern, she called Carlos and Richard. But neither son cared. Busy with their own lives, they offered no help, their coldness cutting deep. With no other choice, Mrs. Margaret hired a care service to accompany her. As she recovered in her room, surrounded by the oppressive silence of her mansion, she realized how truly alone she was. In a moment of clarity and desperation, she decided to test her son's true characters. She emailed them, claiming she had lost her entire fortune in failed investments and was selling the mansion to cover her expenses. The response was immediate. Carlos and Richard called, furious, demanding answers. "Mom, you ruined everything. How are you going to support yourself now? That money was ours too," Richard asked angrily. Their tone made it clear that they cared more about the financial loss than their mother's well-being. Hours later, the brothers arrived at the mansion. The atmosphere was thick with tension. They shouted and accused her of poor decisions. "You should have let us handle the money. We were ready for that responsibility." Carlos fumed. Mrs. Margaret listened silently, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to their agitation. When the shouting stopped, she stood and, with quiet strength, said, "It's sad that you only come when money is involved. You didn't care about me or my well-being. But you should know, I didn't lose anything. I just realized that my wealth will go to those who truly need it." Her words left them stunned. Margaret continued, "True wealth isn't in money. It's in love, respect, and family. I hope one day you'll understand." With that, she walked away, leaving her son speechless. Carlos returned to his business, burying the confrontation under his financial pursuits. But Richard couldn't forget. Regret consumed him, and days later, he returned to his mother, seeking forgiveness. With tear-filled eyes, he confessed, "I've failed you, Mother. I'm not here for inheritance. I want to make things right. Please give me a chance." Mrs. Margaret, cautious, saw sincerity in her son's eyes. She agreed to rebuild their relationship, but made it clear that trust would have to be earned. Together, they revisited their modest childhood home, rediscovering the true meaning of love and family. Richard tried to convince Carlos to join them, but Carlos refused, dismissing their attempts as foolish. Despite Carlos's disinterest, Richard continued to bond with his mother, and over time, their connection grew stronger. Meanwhile, Carlos's world fell apart. His investments suffered a massive decline, and his wife left him, taking their daughter. His once successful life was in ruins. And for the first time, Carlos felt the full weight of his own solitude. In his darkest hour, Mrs. Margaret and Richard, despite the hurt he had caused, welcomed him back with open arms. Their love and compassion showed him the true value of family. Carlos, humbled, began to rebuild his life, this time focusing on love and commitment instead of wealth and status. He sought reconciliation with his wife and daughter, and over time, worked to regain their trust and respect. As the family came back together, they rediscovered the bonds that truly matter. What once divided them had become the foundation for unity and renewal. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a like, subscribe, and leave a comment rating it from 1 to 5. Also, check out the video currently on your screen. See you soon.